National Report Court is back in session. Today's lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, has been filed against Tampa General Hospital after a data breach resulted in more than 1.2 million people having their personal information stolen.
The lawsuit accuses the hospital of failing to safeguard patient data and failing to notify those who had their data stolen until months after the breach. Taking up today's case is Rachel Kugel. She's a trial and defense attorney, and Nicole DeBoard. She's a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. So for the purposes of this segment, Rachel, she will represent the patient suing, and Nicole will represent Tampa General Hospital. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We also have Tom Borelli. He's going to be our judge in the case. He's here in studio. Rachel, the lawsuit claims that one of the victims has already had their identity stolen, and another is a retired FBI agent. Do they have a case here?
It sure looks that way. And, it's important that they have already started to put out, what the damages will be. That's important because when it comes to data breach, in order to sue on that, you've got to have a couple of things, right? You've got to be able to show negligence, and you've also going to have to be able to show damages. So they're already establishing that there are actual damages that are causally related to the breach. In my humble opinion, they've got negligence pretty easily established based on the history of this particular hospital, which had previous issues of this in 2014, 2013. There was actually a clerk indicted around that time also for stealing patient information. So they've had at least 3 previous data breaches. And then, did some cover up after the fact when they waited a long time to tell everybody about it, allowing the damages to become worse by not letting people safeguard their information as quickly as possible.
Okay, so Rachel points out negligence here, maybe a pattern leading up to it, and also this sort of delayed communication. Nicole, that's where we bring you into this. According to a web page set up for the patients, the hospital informed the patients of the data breach about 2 weeks ahead of a 60-day deadline required by federal law. So did they push this off until the very end? Nicole, what's the response to these allegations?
Well, the law's in place for a reason. There are responsibilities for companies or hospitals who face issues of data breach to notify people within a specified period of time. Not only did this hospital meet that specified period of time, but they were 2 weeks ahead of what is required. So I would argue that that is going to be difficult to show that they were non-compliant there. And the previous data breaches, which are referenced, are almost a decade old. So I think it's going to be difficult to establish a pattern. And I think it's also likely that the hospital put into place certain security measures at the time that they'll be able to demonstrate existed. And we all know that you cannot do everything to protect yourself from crime. And that's exactly what this was. This breach was a crime committed against the hospital by someone else. The question will be whether or not the hospital did everything that it should have done to try to prevent themselves from becoming a victim of crime. And I think that they likely will be able to demonstrate that they had security measures in place.
Let's break down the lawsuit. It states that Tampa General Hospital encouraged its patients to spend time and resources mitigating the harm resulting from the data breach after the hospital failed to devote adequate and sufficient to protect that personal information in the first place. Did the hospital, Rachel, put more patients at risk by delaying this notification of the data breach? In other words, should they have let people know sooner?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, yes, there is a law that gives them 60 days. It's almost like a bit of a safe harbor in that regard. They have to comply with it. But they're certainly responsible if they knew about something, could have told people sooner and didn't, and therefore allowed people to have weeks of time where they could have, frozen credit reports or been looking into, potential identity theft issues and watching for it, that they were just allowing it to happen. And while I agree, with my adversary here that this absolutely was a criminal attack on the hospital, you can look at this like any other criminal attack, right? If someone walks in the front door and, God forbid, shoots up a place, that still means that the place is responsible for protecting the individuals inside. And if they were negligent in that protection, so imagine the same thing. If 3 of those events had occurred over the last decade, we would start to question whether this hospital was really doing all it could to protect the people inside. Cyber attacks are no different than physical attacks in that regard. They have the same obligation to protect the people and patients inside.
So the hospital has declined to comment, of course, citing this pending litigation. But Nicole, if you could just address Rachel's final point there, sort of this obligation to protect those who they serve, regardless of where the crime is coming from.
So generally, they hire companies to help them protect their IT. So you don't just have the hospital, but you have a security company who is responsible for having the software in your system and manage that software to make sure that it's functioning to catch all of the latest sort of criminal scam activities that are out there. You cannot catch them all. So the question will be whether or not the hospital did everything it could to get the appropriate safety measures in place to try to prevent even the smallest chance of a breach from happening. And if they did, even if that breach occurred, it does not necessarily make them negligent. You cannot predict every single type of crime that someone will commit.
All right, the cases are out there. Rachel, Nicole, stick around. It's time now to get a verdict.
All right, Tom Borelli, you've been listening in. Which side do you favor?
I'm siding with Rachel and the patients. There's been a pattern that has been mentioned. The devil will be in the details. Did the amount of money they spent on cybersecurity, did that match what other hospitals are doing? That's an unknown at this point. But I think we have seen damages, we've seen negligence, and most concerning is the delay in notification. If you know something is wrong, if a car is defective, it's up to the manufacturer to let the drivers know today, tomorrow, not in a month or 2 weeks, whatever. That, I think, is most damning in this situation.
All right, Tom Borelli's ruling there with that National Report Court is adjourned. Rachel and Nicole and Tom, thanks for weighing in today. We appreciate your insight.